The meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Workgroup meeting will now begin.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Workgroup. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota State Statutes, Section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Tony Newborn, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. Tony Newborn and Andrea Rubenstein, we are the chair of this committee. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Kozak.
Here.
Commissioner Perry.
Here.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Here.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Present.
Chair Clegg.
Here.
Commissioner Newborn.
Here.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Here.
There are 7 ayes.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We will now proceed with our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lens.minneapolismn.gov. And now we will move to the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second, Sandberg.
May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda? Oh,
So
sorry.
moved.
Sorry about that. We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I think that the clerk can call for the roll.
Commissioner Kozak.
Aye.
Commissioner Perry.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Aye.
Chair Clegg.
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Aye.
Commissioner Newborn.
Aye.
There are 7 ayes. That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Item 1 on the agenda is the chair's report.
I will begin discussion of that item. First of all, I realize that this is a new beginning of an old project. And so I wanted to take this opportunity first to thank very much the members of the city clerk staff and the members of the city attorney staff who have been so incredibly helpful to us in the past few weeks. And we expect we'll be asking a lot more of you as we go forward. I also, if it's not too presumptuous, want to thank the members of the Charter Commission. This has been a rather intense and difficult few weeks, and I hope it will ease up a little, but in any sense, it's been intense and difficult. So thank you is due to all of you. As you may have noticed, we have a guest at our meeting today, Deputy Chief Eric Forrest of Minneapolis Police Department has graciously agreed to serve as a liaison.
Here's the results from the web.
Oops, sorry about that. To serve as a liaison with this work group, and he will be attending our meetings. He agreed at the request of Casey Carl to come help us with our evaluation and research and review process as we go forward. And Mr. Carl had also pointed out that there are a couple of items of response data or information that we're looking at, and there may be more in the future. Those include the details, including a potential outline or illustration about existing interjurisdictional partnerships and any formal agreements in place with other law enforcement agencies and how those relate to the Minneapolis Police Department. We also include a summary about MPD reforms that have already been made, as well as those that may be planned in the future or are in progress and their desired effect. A third item is a description of current outreach functions performed by the Minneapolis Police Department and possible consequences of such reforms. Fourth, a discussion about coordinated relationships with the Health Department Office of Violence Prevention and the success of partnerships and collaborative efforts. And I might add that we probably will be devoting at least a good part of the next meeting to this subject. Fifth is he suggested that we receive a presentation about the police department's current operating structure, divisions, and the function services of each division, funding and funding sources, staffing levels, and so on. And finally, details about the outcome and effects of the 2019 co-responder pilot program. And I listed all those things just to give us that information, but also to suggest that we may have other requests in the future. Meanwhile, Deputy Chief Ford, if there's anything you want to address from this today, you will be most welcome. We'll put that in the agenda, but we'll be meeting for a while. And so if you feel you need more time to make those presentations, that's fine too. And I also wanted to ask the other commissioners that they have questions or data requests to add to the list. This is something that we will leave open. Second, for my part of the chair's report is the timeline. Chair Newborn and I are suggesting that we meet every 2 weeks rather than every week, although we will have work in between, and we'll explain that later. The deadline for our review of the City Council amendment is November 27th. And the way it was calculated was based on Minnesota statute, section 410.12, subdivision 5, which is the provision regarding the amendment of the charter. With help from Mr. Carl, we calculated that the 60 days initially to review a proposed charter amendment, which began on July 1st, is still ongoing, essentially. And the fact that we had to cut off that initial part of the review early was because of the printing deadline, not because of the 60 days that needed to be end at that point otherwise. And so if you take those 60 days and then add the 90-day extension, which we have now requested and are acting on, that takes us to November 27th. I note, however, that Thanksgiving is November 26th. So for all practical matters, I don't think we will want any kind of meeting on November 27th, and I would hope that we get our work done before then. As for the work to be done, we're still essentially working on the City Council amendment, and we should expect to have a report and recommendation by that November 27th deadline, and also at that time to recommend steps that we might take to lead up to the November 2021 ballot, should we decide to make a proposal about that. I now turn to Commissioner Newborn to discuss the desired outcome of this 3-month process.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Rubenstein. Commissioner Rubenstein and I had a discussion, in preparation for this meeting about, our desired outcomes of this public safety work group. And when we discussed at our last large commission meeting, there were some discussion points about, what will our role be, what will be the outcome of this report, and how can we make sure that it's going to be meaningful. One from from my perspective, what I would like to see, and I hope that the group concurs, and we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to have a discussion about this, is that, we have this time period to create a report, and not have something that is, just a report that the council will file, and maybe the mayor will file and somewhat do a cursory review, but a report that would be meaningful and helpful to the city council, to the mayor's office, to the city as a whole, and ultimately to our residents, that could be potentially used as a part of creating that structure for what public safety would look like for the city of Minneapolis. And so, from my perspective, hoping that this report would be one that would be valuable, and of course, I think all of our interest is there and aligned, and we want to all see that. I'm grateful that we have a police liaison here to help inform us about the work of the police department. But one of the topics and points of discussion that Commissioner Rubenstein and I mentioned was some opportunity to hear from other key department staff across the city that have touch points with the police department, such as the Civil Rights Department, the Office of Police Conduct Review, the Office or Division of Race and Equity, obviously some folks from the City Attorney's Office to help guide this conversation and help us to create a report, again, that is going to be meaningful and valuable. I also see this as an opportunity for us to, there's been a lot of tension around with the city council members, especially the ones that authored the proposal. This could be a place where we take, and these are my words, a higher road in establishing partnerships and relationships with the council, and inviting them also to this, to speak at this work group to help us in putting a report together. So we wanted to save some time to get some feedback about that and find out, from the rest of this commission and this work group, what your interest level is as well, and your desired outcome. So wanted to open up the discussion about, and briefly about how we envision this working and and what outcomes we intend with this report.
Thank you, Commissioner Newborn. I'm going to move us, if there are no comments, to item 2 of the agenda, which is a discussion of the Charter Commission's role and responsibilities. As we were starting this extended review of the City Council amendment, it became clear in our earlier discussions that we need to have a clear understanding of the role and responsibilities of the Charter Commission. Basically, this would encompass the scope of our authority or jurisdiction. That is what we can do as a commission and what we can't do. And an easy example is that we can't act contrary to state law, and we can't make state law. And so I wanted to turn to Chair Clegg, if he doesn't mind, and to Casey Carl to offer us some initial guidance, and then throw this open for discussion.
I'd be happy to start. As I think everyone knows, there are basically 4 ways to amend the charter. All of them flow through the Charter Commission. And I think our role is slightly different for each route. I'm going to set aside for a minute the amendment by ordinance, and that's an amendment where the Charter Commission approves it, all 13 city council members approve it, and the mayor approves it. Usually those are technical in nature and to conform with state law, so I'm going to set that aside. There are 3 other ways the charter can be amended. The first is by citizen petition. If a petition is signed by 5% of the people, of the voters in the last general election, citizen petition can forward an amendment to the ballot. Our role is very limited as the Charter Commission for citizen petitions. We basically accept the petition, we transmit it to the clerk's office, and the clerk verifies the number of signatures, and it then gets forwarded to the City Council to be put on the ballot. We have taken it upon ourselves, although the statute doesn't necessarily address this, when amendments have been either contrary to state law or more in the form of an ordinance. We have made recommendations on our own motion to the City Council, for example, the $15 an hour minimum wage. We recommended to the City Council that that not be placed on the ballot because it was more akin to an ordinance than a charter change. But other than that, our role for citizen petitions is very limited. The second way that amendments can be put on the ballot is by the Charter Commission acting on its own motion. That is perhaps where we have the most discretion and also the most responsibility to ensure that a charter amendment is consistent with good standards and is appropriate to go on the ballot. And an example of that would be, for example, the plain language charter, when the Charter Commission over 11 years rewrote the entire city charter and placed it on the ballot in 2013, where it was overwhelmingly approved. The third way an amendment can get on the ballot starts at the City Council, and that's what this is. The City Council can propose an amendment. If the City Council proposes an amendment, it goes first to the Charter Commission, and the Charter Commission has up to 150 days, I think we all know how this works by now, up to 150 days to either approve that amendment, to propose a substitute amendment, or to reject that amendment. Notwithstanding what the Charter Commission does, even if the Charter Commission rejects a proposed amendment by the City Council, the City Council can nevertheless put that amendment on the ballot. After the Charter Commission makes its determination, the City Council can, if the Charter Commission has proposed a substitute amendment, either put the substitute amendment or its original amendment on the ballot. If the Charter Commission either approves or rejects the proposed amendment of the City Council, the City Council can put it on the ballot subject to the veto of the mayor. That's when it's after the Charter Commission review that a proposed amendment would go back to the City Council and then would be subject to possible veto and possible override by the mayor. So that's where we are with respect to this particular amendment. We are in the position where we've elected to take our full 150 days, and our conclusion at the end will be an explanation, but also we will either approve the amendment, we will propose a substitute amendment, or we will reject the amendment. If we propose a substitute or reject, I imagine we would file a written report explaining our action. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I have a question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you for that. That is certainly a good outline of our legal role and responsibility. But I wondered if we should also talk a little bit about our practical role and responsibility. And by that, I mean things like we already talked about this in the first phase of our review, but we don't really have the means, for instance, to conduct a survey of the voters in Minneapolis to see how they feel. We do have the means, of course, to have public hearings, and we did that. We probably don't have the budget or the means to hire consultants to tell us what to do, although we certainly have the means and authority and have done so to request information from various departments of the city to collect research and that sort of thing. So I just wondered if it would be helpful to talk a little bit more about things that are maybe beyond not the scope of our authority, maybe is the wrong word, but the scope, or the practical scope of our jurisdiction.
Of course. And I was going to get to that next.
Oh, good. Sorry.
No, it's a good segue. In my remarks that I made on August 5th, I talked about what I thought were some of the considerations the Charter Commission should take into account when deciding whether or not an amendment is appropriate for the general election ballot. And I came up with 5, and there may be more than that for any particular proposed charter amendment, and there may be unique considerations for unique proposals. But I think every proposal to go on the ballot has to pass these 5 tests. The first one being, is it germane to the charter? And by that I mean, is it dealing with the form and substance of city government? You remember that the $15 an hour minimum wage was determined not to be germane to the charter. Can the city regulate the conduct of private employers? Yes, but not in the charter. That's appropriate for an ordinance. So that's what I mean by that. The second consideration that I have anyway is the proposal well considered? Or as we sometimes say on the Charter Commission, is it fully baked? Has the proposal undergone significant public discussion, and has there been significant input, both from the public and all stakeholders with respect to the proposed amendment? Third, is the amendment clear and concise? An amendment should not be vague. For example, I would oppose a charter amendment that would say the city must adequately fund X, because adequately is not clear and concise and would be the subject of endless litigation, as somebody who wanted more funding would say that's not adequate, and others would say it's in excess of adequate. So I would want an amendment to be clear and concise. 4, does an amendment interfere with or limit the rights of voters? Right now, the Charter Commission can't change the charter. City Council can't change the charter. Only the voters can change the charter. And if we take something out of the charter, that means the voters no longer have the ability to veto it or weigh in on any proposed changes. So I would be reluctant to support a charter amendment that limits or impairs the rights of the voters. Finally, is the proposal consistent with state law? Obviously, everything in the charter has to be consistent with state law, and we need to undertake a review of proposed amendments to ensure that they are. And I think I would consider adding a 6th plank, the Ginder plank, to that, which is the amendment necessary to accomplish the intended objective? If we can accomplish the intended objective without amending the charter, I would prefer to do that generally than amend the charter if it's not necessary. So those are the elements that I would consider when making our decision. And I think for us to accept an amendment proposed by the City Council, the amendment would have to pass all of those tests. If we reject an amendment proposed by the City Council because it fails one of those tests, we should lay that out in our report. Similarly, if how an amendment performs on those various tests affects our determination and we propose a substitute amendment, that should also be included in our report and the reasons for it. So anybody else? Casey, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no words of wisdom I could add to that. It was brilliant.
Thank you.
Are there comments or suggestions or questions from anybody else?
I have a question for Chair Clegg. So kind of thinking out, Commissioner Rubenstein and I were talking about how we were envisioning the standard or practice that you just laid out, and I see it kind of as an attorney similar to creating a prima facie case. So a test or a standard that we follow when reviewing decisions like this, and usually, whether it's codified in the law or it's a standard of review for the courts. I would be really interested in writing this out and making this a part as an appendix or supplement to our rules, so that as we, you know, for us, it's a helpful tool, but also as new commissioners come in and there may be some confusion around our role and kind of standard of review, we can have that as a tool to refer back to. I wanted to see your thoughts on that.
Thank you. I think that would be a good idea. But rather than just have me come up with the 5 or 6 elements that I think are worthy of consideration, maybe there's another work group in our future to go through these and make sure we're not missing anything, make sure that we're all thinking along the same lines. But one reason this is difficult is because the statute doesn't give any reasons for, doesn't give us any factors. So we're basically on our own here to decide what we think is relevant in determining whether to move an amendment forward or not. I think these are the best standards to use, but these would be our standards. They are not the standards set forth in the statute or in case law.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree that these standards are exactly what we need and what we're looking for to have a reasoned review of any proposed amendment. I also had been, again, talking with Commissioner Newborn about how this maybe, well, now it will be another work group putting together the standards. But as some of the lawyers in the room know, when we have rules of court, we have the black letter rules, and then we have advisory notes that follow that add more clarification or explanation or source of these rules. And obviously we don't have source other than our own common sense at this point, but it would also be useful not only in preparing the standards, but in our discussion last week during our full commission meeting, we had a lot of people raised other or connected or related thoughts about applying these standards. And those could be in some kind of advisory comments to follow it. So that's just a logistical thing I wanted to add.
Thank you. I also think it's important for us to recognize that this is not necessarily a comprehensive list. I think that every amendment would have to pass these tests, but a new amendment on some completely different topic might cause us to think and say, hey, here are some things that are particular to this topic, and we need to add additional tests to consider. So I think this would be sort of a universal group of standards, but there could be more specific standards for different amendments down the road as well.
And perhaps such advisory notes could make that clear.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Sandberg is asking, are these guidelines not standards and rules? Probably, yes. But I think we're allowed to draft our own rules, aren't we, for our own use?
We are, and we have.
Yes. Any other comments, questions? In which case?
Mr. Rubenstein?
Yes.
I just wanted to say I'm happy with following those. We may modify them as we get going, and more should be added, but I think that's a good set of standards to follow to get us going. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Perry. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of proposals and standards, and I think we just had that, but is there anything that you want to add, Commissioner Newborn? So I turn the agenda over back to you.
Thank you. No, there's no other discussions on that. Not sure if we needed to formally create a work group or if that's a larger group discussion around this, but I really like this idea and movement towards creating standards of review.
Chair Newborn?
Oh. Yes.
I'll defer.
Chair Schwarzkopf.
Go ahead.
Just go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit is that I think that at times we may need to have more information on what the city can provide for us or some other group could provide for us. And I think that, if we really need to, we could ask other foundations or other groups to fund something that we may need. In this particular case with this amendment, I think we really need to know what the public is really thinking rather than, different special interest groups telling us what they think. And one of the things that we're missing is some way of really digging into each neighborhood and find out what people are really thinking. When I've been talking to many consultants through the International City Managers Association, which I'm a member, they point out that not only do we need to talk about what is going on as to the type of public safety we want in the future, but we really need to find out where the present police department is. And there's a study going on, I don't know if it's started yet or not, that will do that. We've had already the 911 study, which gives us some ideas of that. But there's no study really or any getting it right down to the public and finding out where they're coming from. We've seen recently some opinion polls in the Minneapolis newspaper, but that's not really talking to the people. And so I thought if we needed to, we could go and ask foundations for money to go ahead and provide such a standard as would be recommended by some of the consultants that I've talked to anyway. Thank you.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf, do you think that if we pursued that suggestion, that might be more appropriate for going forward after November 27th to consider what we might do for the 2021 ballot?
I think that would be a good idea if we're going to continue. I mean, I don't know what our report will say, but assuming our report wants to continue working on this issue, I think that's fine, yes.
Thank you.
Great. Should we move to the final item on the agenda? Or no, to reviewing a timeline and initial work plan?
Should we talk about the item 2.3 on the agenda first, the substitute?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Sorry about that. So we're moving to item 2.3, potential for substitute or alternative proposals. Sorry, and my phone just went on mute. I think we talked a little bit about this before, and Commissioner and Chair Rubenstein, is this a discussion to go into more detail about the substitute proposals or the type of report that we want to submit?
We might want to just defer it to when we get closer to the report.
Okay.
Unless somebody has in mind a substitute or alternative proposal now. We've already had a couple, of course.
Great. It looks like
if I could, yes. I would just say that it's entirely possible that we would consider a substitute. And so I think that is just as likely as any of the other alternatives. And for example, what comes to mind to me is right now the department or the Division of Violence Prevention is not a charter department. Mm-hmm. We may decide that a worthy substitute would be to make that a charter department. Which we could propose. But I imagine that whether we approve substitute or reject, we're going to write a report explaining our decision and conclusion. So if we did move forward a substitute like that, I imagine it would involve the same level of reporting. So I don't think we need to come to that determination until we get much closer to the end of our work.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Clegg. Commissioner Abbott, I think you had a...
Yes, on substitute question, I am working on a substitute. As I indicated on August 5th, I have some issues with the council proposal that actually really don't go to the question of its authority over police matters, more to the division of power between the mayor and the council and some of the specific details. And I'm actually kind of contemplating working on a substitute with basically, I think of it as the Giroux-Isaacson Amendment plus, in the sense that it would structurally give the council the power to do what it wants to do, but leave some of that what I view as kind of extraneous subject matter out of it, and kind of strip it down to its essence. And I think I would like to introduce that at some point. And related to that, I think one of the questions that we should address is how central the council part of this, the relationship between the council and the mayor, how central is that to the council's proposal? I think we ought to have some public hearing on the council versus the mayor issue, as opposed to some of the general police reform stuff. And if we could build that into the schedule, I think that would be a good thing. I would like to get my substitute in relatively soon, and if we can, I think if we leave the substitute discussion to the end, it's going to get jammed up and won't get discussed, which is unfortunately what happened in the initial process. We only had 35 days from July 1st to August 5th, and there wasn't really any time to discuss substitutes in that time. And I think the earlier we build in the process for substitutes, the better. My comment.
Commissioner Abbott, thank you so much. I have a clarifying question just to make sure that I understand. Your substitute amendment or proposal that you're discussing, would that be a part of, and with the police structure, that would be directly connected to the council's proposal? Or I know there's been some talk about having that discussion about the roles of council and the mayor and the sort of the government structure and the powers to be a separate discussion of the commission. So I guess my question is, do you see that as a part of this sort of police, how we are imagining kind of the police department and what this report looks like, or should it be something that's a separate topic or issue for this body to discuss and outside of the timeline?
Well, I think the council mayor issue is something that's important to me. It's one of the reasons that I got under the Charter Commission to begin with. That's why I applied. And I think the council proposal kind of bites off more than it can chew when it kind of takes on both of the elements in the room at once. So my concept is to kind of strip the police part down. I think it's a legitimate issue for the people to be able to vote on allowing police reform. To me, I view the council proposal essentially like two giant proposals in one thing, and I want to separate them. I think it would be easier to deal with both politically and as a matter of democracy. My substitute would be a kind of, I think, a leaner, meaner version of the council proposal, I guess is what I would say. And I'd like to have some runway for that proposal. So.
Great. Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I believe that Commissioner Sandberg has a comment.
Thank you. Not necessarily about Commissioner Abbott's proposal, but just in general, I'm assuming we will leave the door open to possible substitute amendments. We can either say yes, no, or substitute. The one thing is, it shouldn't be left entirely to the end, because I can quite possibly see the need for a public hearing depending on what the substitute is. So I'm hoping that we are willing to build that into our thought process and not just out of hand reject the possibility of substitutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Sandberg. Commissioner and Chair Rubenstein.
Thank you, Chair Newberg. I just wanted to add to what you just said. The general subject of the shift in power that was proposed in the City Council amendment and what we might do with that is still kind of a burning issue, as Commissioner Abbott has noted. And we talked about that and consulted with Casey Carl and Chair Clegg about how we might handle this in the next 3 months or going forward. And I wondered if Mr. Carl would mind telling the group what he told us, what you told us, about how we might structure the discussion or the consideration of such an amendment.
Certainly, Madam Chair, and I'm going to ask you to clarify, check me if I'm off track, but during our initial discussions about the results of the feedback from the full Charter Commission at its special meeting last week, where this question of the structure or form of government was raised as a possible supplemental or secondary issue that was raised by the current proposal submitted by the council, it seemed like this subject matter of form of government certainly would be something that this work group, which is focused on the current proposal about the future of public safety submitted by the council, this work group could certainly propose back to the full commission, yes, something should be looked at or evaluated. That question is something that has merit, and the Charter Commission as a larger body should consider if it wishes to have that discussion itself, if it wants to appoint a separate group to look at that, but that the current proposal frames the discussion now, that within that framework set by the statute, we are reviewing, the Charter Commission Public Safety Work Group is reviewing a proposal submitted by the City Council. It's obviously open to substituting, but that the nature of the substitute might be very, very large if it is getting into the form of government, and that might be a larger question the Charter Commission wishes to take up separate from this current issue, somewhat akin to the idea that the standards Chair Clegg and others have identified both in the August 12th discussion and today again are something that are relevant to this group's work, but are also beyond and continuing past it, and that might be a recommendation this group makes back to the full Charter Commission, that a group should be established to look at that and report back.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Now, I would add, it is such a big question and issue that I would feel very uncomfortable about trying to fit it into these 3 months when there's no good reason. We have to include that in our report in response to the City Council amendment, and every good reason to spend more time on it if we so choose to do so, and have ample time for public hearings and the like, knowing that we're also doing redistricting. But in any event, that it is a very big and important issue, and I personally would hate to rush it in any way.
Great. I believe, thank you so much, Chair Rubenstein. Chair Clegg, I believe you're up next.
Thank you. I was going to say some of what Chair Rubenstein just mentioned, and that is that to respond on the Council's proposed public safety amendment, we have to respond by the end of November. If we're considering something dealing with the form and structure of government, that is not subject to that November deadline. It can continue into next year if we want to. So I think we should have separate conversations. They can be had on parallel tracks, but we should have separate conversations. And if we did propose a substitute to the Council's public safety amendment, I think it should be in the realm of public safety. We would not propose as a substitute amendment, I don't think, something dealing just with the form and structure of government. I think any proposed substitute would be on the same subject as the Council's proposed amendment. And if we want to talk about form and structure, I would recommend starting another work group. You can volunteer for 2 if you want, to discuss this subject and continuing that discussion as long as we need to.
Thank you so much, Chair Clegg. Commissioner Perry.
Yes, I just want to quick say that I think we need to make sure that we don't get in the same bind that we did before when we had much less time to work with because of the council's timeline, where we start working on substitute motions before we've done the all the research that Commissioner Rubenstein talked about at the top of this meeting. I mean, we have a long list of stuff that we need to look into, and I think that should inform what comes out of a substitute motion if there is one. I mean, we may end up not doing one, but if there is one, I think it's informed by the research work that we do. And that was one of my arguments for voting to extend the time that we were going to take as a commission. So I'm trying to be a little bit consistent here in that. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Commissioner Perry. Any other comments about the substitute amendment or proposal? Okay. Carrying on, should we move to the next portion of the agenda, Commissioner Rubenstein?
Thank you, Chair Newburn. The next item on the agenda is a timeline and initial work plan. And of course, we've already talked about our November 27th deadline for review of the City Council amendment. Our brainstorming, and particularly in the full commission meetings, as well as our other work group meetings, has led to a daunting list of items for research and data collection. And on top of that, we have a long list, and we still haven't even developed it to any extent, of the people that we should speak to or consult with, all the way from city staff in different departments to other jurisdictions, to community groups, and so on and so forth. The list is very long. And basically, there's no way, even with our extension to November 27th, to include all the stakeholders or all the people who might have information or insight for us that could be helpful to our review to come to one of our work group meetings. The time is just too short to do that. And so one thing we need to do is make a list of people or roles, that is people, positions of people we want to consult with. And then we need to decide which ones might have priority, which ones we would like to ask to come to our work group meetings to talk with all of us. But again, we don't have time to invite everybody on our list to come, or we'll be here 24/7. And so we had the idea to divide up our work group, or anybody else who wants to, into pairs or even singly, to carry on some of the conversations and consultations between our work group meetings, to ask the questions that we want to ask and gather the information we want to gather, and then to come back to the work group to report on those conversations or that information. That was the process we followed when we looked at the 2018 amendment, at least in part. And also when we were working on the plain language charter, we divided up and talked to various members of the city council in particular to get their feedback and their ideas about moving the plain language charter along. So it's something we've done in the past and can do, and it's a way of accomplishing all the tasks that we want to accomplish by November 27th. So I wanted to ask the members of the work group, first of all, to for suggestions as to the extent we don't have them yet, and we have many, as to whom we want to ask to speak, and then also which people are more appropriate for coming to our work group meetings, and others for whom we can contact, mostly on our own time offline, as long as we report back everything that we discovered. And just to get us started, we were thinking that for our next meeting in 2 weeks, we would invite the city council, the city coordinator, and perhaps a representative from the Office of Violence Prevention of the Health Department to hear about the 9/11 study, to hear about the staffing and efficiency study to the extent as far along as they've gotten. We can ask about the coordination between the police department and the Office of Violence Prevention and other intra-departmental coordination related to public safety and violence prevention. So that seems like an important meeting for us to have in the work group rather than separately. We might also want a meeting in the work group about the legal barriers to police reform and what can be accomplished by a charter change, if any, and that might involve the new city attorney who's just come on, I think is just coming on next week, and maybe somebody from the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. Those are just ideas, and those seem to be people that we want to meet with as a group, but then there are others that we may not. So I wanted to open it up to people's suggestions or comments. Chair Clegg?
I was just going to suggest that the two co-chairs should boss us around and tell us what to do. I think we've got a pretty good group who can do legwork as needed, but it would help, I think, move things along, and we don't have enough time not to move things along, to have the two co-chairs say, okay, Clegg, you go update the research that we did in 2018 and have it done by next Thursday.
Not tomorrow.
Seriously, not tomorrow. And, it's fine to say, well, here is a discrete task and we'll put it out and see who volunteers. But if nobody volunteers, we still need to get the work done. So we need you guys to push us around.
I'm certainly willing, as Commissioner Newborn is. And by some strange coincidence, we've already made a big list of names and organizations. So we can work on that. But I would still leave it that it's open to suggestion, right? If there's anything people want to add, and we could get that out to everybody. Commissioner Perry? Oh, I'm sorry. You said Commissioner Mecci would like to comment.
Hello, this is Commissioner Mecci. So just something to put out there as an idea. I was intrigued by Judge Lejeune's letter, and there's an organization that's been in play for a long time at Hennepin County called the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, and it includes police chiefs from surrounding suburbs, and it includes the mayor and city council and the sheriff and the different folks that work together on issues that could be regional or support each other. And it might be good to get a few people from that group to present at one of our meetings, just thinking about the judge's letter and the role that Minneapolis police play with surrounding communities in the metro area.
Good, thank you. Very helpful.
Madam Chair.
And I can find those contact information if you want and send it to you, having worked at the county.
That's great. Thank you. Commissioner Schwarzkopf?
The reason I'm talking about the legal barriers, somehow we need to know what's in the union contract. I think the union contract is going to be a major legal barrier. And the more we know about that contract and how it might be changed would be very helpful.
Commissioner, I think it's already on our research and reference list in LIMS.
Good, very good.
So that will be helpful.
Thank you.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes, now I do have a comment. So what I know you and Commissioner Newborn have worked out a schedule for us to meet. I was going to sort of suggest sort of a modification, given that Chair Clegg is suggesting you guys push us around, that maybe we meet once a week starting out, and then we meet every other week as we see how things are going. So it's a thought.
Chair Newborn?
My work schedule is picking up, and so I definitely hear that we may need to do that starting out, and then maybe for the first month. For me, I'd be interested in that, and then taper off to every other week. But it's not just me that's on the committee. We want to hear from some other folks, some other commissioners about that, and I see that Commissioner Kozak has his hand raised.
Commissioner Kozak?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairs. I guess I've been listening, and I guess what I'm trying to figure out exactly, I don't want to sound too dumb, but I'm trying to figure exactly what it is we're trying to do. I don't think we have the ability, as we all know, to come up with the magic potion how we're going to change the culture of the Minneapolis Police Department. That's beyond our ken. We have neither the resources, nor do we have the power to affect very much. And I think we need to confine our efforts to the charter itself. There are a lot of things, and it's a hard thing because every time you come up with an idea, you say, no, that really is something that is really up to the mayor or up to the council or up to for both of them. But again, I don't know yet. What does the charter allow us to do to further the idea of reforming the department, changing the culture so that it does what I think most everybody wants it to do? And what in the charter is an obstacle to that, if there are any obstacles? And then what does the charter, what's appropriate to go into the charter? Because we know that there's certain things that state law prevents. There are things that the council has to make budgetary decisions, which have a huge impact, and which are again beyond our scope. So I'm still struggling with trying to come up with a way to focus our efforts, so that we can get done what we need to get done by November 27th. And maybe if we can figure out a statement that here are the three or four things that we need to focus on that are within the purview of the Charter Commission. Because I have questions myself with the chief here. I'm still grappling what is the ideal size of this department. We have half the power in City Hall saying we don't need hardly any cops, and we have the chief saying, as he did back in 2019, we need 80 new cops a year. And I don't know how you even begin to come up with some kind of a solution to bring those two sides together. But that may not be within our scope, within our purview to be examining, because these are budgetary decisions. So anyway, I know I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but I'm still trying to struggle with exactly what are we trying to accomplish. And I think a substitute amendment, the previous discussion on the substitute amendment, that makes sense, because we have to report something to the city council. And I have my own feelings about whether a substitute is appropriate or whether in fact we give sufficient account. All we have to do is reiterate the 5 or 6 factors that Barry Clegg and Commissioner Ginder have laid out for us. But anyway, does it make sense what I'm trying to get at? I think we need more focus. We have too many questions we're trying to resolve all at once, and we have to confine our efforts to what can we do, what's in the charter that's an obstacle, and what can we do to make the charter make it easier for the mayor and the council and the department to function in a way that we want a reformed operation, public safety operation.
Thank you, Commissioner Kozak. I'm going to guess that there's not much disagreement with what you just said. Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. There were a couple of things I wanted to mention, and one escaped me as soon as I put my comment in the chat box. As far as other groups and other stakeholders, I remember what it was. When we talk about the legal barriers, I don't want to be too touchy-feely, but can we talk about the legal premise? Because I don't think everything has to be a barrier that blocks what we want to do, but there are parameters around which innovation can occur, creativity can occur, and collaboration can occur. So that would be just one observation. And I know that may be, splitting hairs for some, but I think language can convey a deeper meaning. As far as the stakeholders and other people to perhaps get feedback from, I'm thinking of the Federation, the police chief, and the mayor. Specifically, and I can share these questions, I jotted down some questions that I would like to see asked them. Seems like we've heard a lot of where do you stand, how do you feel, what's your idea, but are there options that these groups really do? What is their perspective as far as some good work being done? Have there been some really good conversations with officers in the community? I know a few years ago, officers were really involved in the art flow up on the north side. Are there volunteer opportunities maybe that officers could have in the community to kind of build trust and relationships? Also, and from whatever point of view they come, are they thinking of things that we haven't thought of? Here we are espousing all these ideas, as is the council, but and this may hopefully speak to the issue that we've heard around morale, can officers feel heard, potential strategies or ideas that they may have to partner in this program or in this effort? And when Commissioner Kozak was talking about the budget, really looking at the budget as a holistic approach, Commissioner Newborn went through a number of departments that we can, into. But is there a way or a plan that the budget allocations for these various departments can all come at this issue in a complementary way? For example, a couple months ago, some MPD funding was cut out to fund a public arts healing programs. It's like, help us understand, how does this public art healing program impact and affect the overall sense of violence prevention and public safety? Let's have the pot of money that the city deals with. Let's look at it strategically. And if it gets divided up among various departments, then what is the plan or the approach that those various departments plug into for this overall issue? The city council talks about a holistic department. Well, let's look at the holistic budgetary issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? We also have a bunch of comments about when we could meet, such as later in the day, and we'll figure all that out after the meeting and maybe send around a survey to everybody. If there are no other comments, before we leave this topic of the work plan, I wanted to ask Deputy Chief Force if you had anything you wanted to add or say at this point.
Thank you very much.
Not required, just invited.
Oh, thank you. I've been looking at some of the requests that people would like to see, and I have been today. I've been working with people and trying to get the message out to where some of the repositories of this information are, the subject matter experts are, and working to gather all that into a manner that's easy for people to read and digest. It's kind of a wide variety of informational asks. One of the questions, and as our staffing our staffing and departmental structure tends to be in flux a lot. So when we look at the current operating structure, divisions and staffing, things like that, that may look different than how it looked 5 months ago in terms of having to collapse units or eliminate functions in order to maintain staffing on the street. So I think in that regard, I could give you a couple versions of that, give you an idea of what it is that what our structure and functions look like today versus what they looked like at the beginning of the year. That's going to be somewhat significant when we talk about some of the outreach functions that were performed by the MPD that we've recently had to reallocate resources from. We had some fairly robust and dedicated units toward community outreach that we've had to since reallocate resources from to maintain staffing in other areas. So that, like I said, that kind of flows a little bit. So if I give you a snapshot in time as to what it is we have right now, it may not be indicative of what we were doing or what we would like to do in that realm. I think in terms of handling some of these things, it'd be good, as you're developing the meeting plan, to see if there's specific topics for each different meeting you'd like to take on one at a time, or if as this data and this information becomes available, some of the things are fairly complete, such as the 2019 co-responder pilot program. I've talked with Deputy Chief Waite, who kind of spearheaded that and have some information on that. Office of Violence Prevention, I think you said you'd like to have someone come in. I've worked with Sasha Cotton in terms of, and especially around our partnership with the group violence intervention. So that's kind of a fairly easy conversation to have. But some of the other things, such as the summary of reforms, we're getting that together because there's a series of things that the chief has enacted in his 3 years in office, and then also things that we are enacting now, some in response to the court order from the state, or the lawsuit from the state, and some is part of what Chief Arredondo is enacting and changing as we speak in order to to move the MPD forward. So there's a lot of things there that we can get into and discuss as I get that information together. So, like I said, as we move forward, if there's specific items you'd like me to get ready for the next meeting or to provide that information, I can focus my attention on those things so that way we can move move forward in whatever process you want, and I can have that level of information available for you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Metke?
I this might be a little late because the topic moved on, but a couple other thoughts I have in my head, and this goes along with the officer's comments just now. So moving out community engagement opportunities out of the police department, it seems like it might be kind of interesting to listen to Charlie Adams or Lieutenant Mark Klutko talk about PALS, Bike Cops for Kids, the structured stuff that they do and the methodology behind it, in the fact that it is done to build relationships with young people to eventually diversify the police department. And so it might be interesting to hear that component at one of our meetings. And then with Commissioner Garcia's comments, I'd like to put out that Mad Dads, A Mother's Love with Lisa Clemens and St. Stephen's could come as a team. They work downtown and with us in Loring Park. As you know, part of my job in Loring Park is police partnerships, police community partnerships. And those three have developed really strong, interesting partnerships with the police that folks testified about having. And so to listen to how they were developed and what is going on and what they've learned through it, I think would be also very helpful. We're doing a public service, having these meetings open as well. And so if people are listening, then they get that firsthand information about questions that were raised in the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak, do you have your hand up again, or is this from before?
No, it's again.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is something that is kind of in line with what Commissioner Metke said. It's clear to me, since this whole discussion began after the Memorial Day tragedy with George Floyd, watching the city council and the mayor and the department, there seems to be a struggle. And as the chief just reinforced, the outreach functions that I think were growing in a good way in the department, because I know some of the people involved, and but now they've had to pull back because of the budget constraints. And I think this, I don't want to contradict what I said before about trying to focus, but it seems to me that one of the things a charter should look at or should consider is, what do we want this department to look like? And it goes hand in hand, I think, with what the idea of changing the culture. We hear that all the time. But what I see is the tendency, the council is pulling stuff out because it has the power of the purse, pulling stuff out of the department, sending it over to the health department, to that new division of violence prevention. Is that something we should be concerned about? Is that something that's within the purview of the Minneapolis Charter? Trying to define what we want the police department as such to do. What I fear, the more stuff, what we consider community policing, outreach, the things that Jana mentioned, the police athletic league, the bike program, all these things, the more we pull out, we're going to end up with the very department that a lot of its critics say we don't want, and that's the only function is going to be the warrior function. And the more you get outside the department, these where they're going to share responsibilities, whether it's responding to the co-respondent idea that I know is there is a program that's going right now. But those kinds of things, are we going to keep them within the department, or is all that stuff going to get shipped out to this new department, the new division, in which some people want to make into a charter department? And then you have two different lines of authority, sometimes with the same incident. And is that the right way to go or not? And the answer to that, I don't know. I have some suspicions. But is that the kind of thing we should be discussing? Because it seems to me that is the fundamental issue we're facing right now in this city, is what the department is going to look like. And that's, at least in part, should be our responsibility to look at, because otherwise there's going to be a dynamic between the mayor and the council at all anyway, no matter what we decide. But is that something we should look at? And that we could subsume a lot of these other questions into that one big question. And so we can combine some of these questions, and that would be the overall thing. What do we want? What kind of department do we want? What are the functions we want in the police department, and what functions should be moved someplace else?
Thank you, Commissioner Kozak. Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. To Commissioner Kozak's statement about what the department will look like, I think precedent of what is listed in the charter about other charter departments would be appropriate, but invoking Commissioner Abbott's theory is that the charter does not hold. It's not a method for ordinance or policy. So looking at what the department would look like, yes, as perhaps part of the report, but realizing that whatever is however it's listed in the charter, it's listed the same relative to all other charter departments, if that makes sense. So I think we ought to keep policy recommendations, such as what the department will look like, in the appropriate format as in the report. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Any other comments, questions? Then we turn to the last item on the agenda, item 4, and I turn it back over to Chair Newborn.
It's the Charter Commission meeting. But I'm on mute.
Oh,
and,
make sure that your phone is on mute, Commissioners. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein.
I go through as only a phone number.
Oh, hi. You want to make sure that everyone's phones are muted.
I don't want my face up.
Someone is, we're hearing somebody's phone call.
You should go into my email and minutes and...
Okay.
So,
if there's a way for us to mute one of our commissioners using Teams.
I think it was a guess that I attempted to mute them. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the last item on our agenda is next steps. And I think there's some decision points that we need to make as far as how often we meet. And it sounds like there are some commissioners who are open to meeting on a weekly basis. I put into the chat that if we did, we'd need to meet at a slightly later time just because of work. And so I think possibly Commissioner Rubenstein and I could connect and figure out how the next meeting structure and time is going to take place. But we have some interest in folks being available to meet on a weekly basis. And we want to be cognizant of the fact that there are folks who are commissioners who are working and don't want to take up too much of your time and making try to commission your life. But this is an important topic, and we are close on a timeline. So I think we will decide how often in the kind of flow or battle rhythm, so to speak, of what we're going to do moving forward as far as the meetings. It seems that there may need to be a discussion, and Commissioner and Chair Rubenstein and I could have a discussion around the scope of this work and the role. Again, a little bit of that conversation around the role of this work group and the Charter Commission and what our desired outcomes will be. We have a long list and a lot of stakeholders that we want to include in this work, and so it seems as if we need to talk about narrowing the scope or just figuring out what the scope should be. And I think the next steps of this, along with how often we're meeting, is who we are inviting to the meetings to provide presentations. I think there was some discussion in the chat around having a topic for every meeting may be helpful, and so that will help structure the agenda, but definitely want to connect with Commissioner Rubenstein on how we do that. Those are the things that I had listed as sort of next steps. Commissioner Rubenstein, do you want to add to that as well?
Thank you. I think you covered it pretty well. I would add only that this meeting was sort of meant to be, although we've been meeting up for the last few months, or month anyway, this is kind of a new beginning, and it seemed important to put down some parameters. And I think we've done that, and it's very helpful. A lot of the things that have been raised, we've already thought about, and we will put it to paper so that people can see it and we can go from there. So thank you, Chair Newborn.
Great, thank you. Are there any other discussion points before we adjourn? Okay, great. Hearing none. So this is my first time helping to chair a meeting. Do we just adjourn, or do we need to take a vote?
If there's no objection, Madam Chair, you just adjourn the meeting.
Oh, great. Hearing no objection, given that it's 5:27, we'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you all so much for your input and insight, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay.